welcome. I'm James Milan. This is Talk of the Town, and we are with Dr. Oneeka Williams. And viewers may recall that we had a short conversation with Dr. Williams preceding her appearance at the Martin Luther King commemoration a couple of months ago in January of this year, at which she was the featured speaker. At that time, I said to Dr. Williams that I really looked forward to a longer conversation, and happily, here we are to be able to do that. So first of all, thanks very much for being here.
It's very nice to be here, James. Thank you for having me.
I've been really looking forward to this.
As have I.
Now, I had mentioned when we last spoke that you are a urologic surgeon. You work out of St. Elizabeth's Hospital here in Boston, and we are not going to be talking about that just about at all today.
Isn't
because
that something?
Yeah, you have an entirely other life that we're going to focus on mainly, and that is as a children's book author, but with a particular mission in mind. So we'll get way into that, but I'd like to start, since you have decided to combine these careers, I'd like to start with finding out some about your own childhood. So take us a little bit back to how it was for you to grow up in Guyana, right?
Guyana, yes.
Oh, Guyana,
yes,
sorry.
British Guiana, no problem.
And you know, where how deep and long-lasting this desire for, first of all, to be a surgeon or at least practice in medicine, and everything else related to your current ambitions. How far back does it go?
It goes all the way back. Guyana, I tell kids, and they're usually just in amazement of the fact that we grew up in Guyana with no television, no computers, no digital devices. We have had none of those things. And so it was a way of, our way of life was about exploration, was about kind of, communing with the outdoors, was about connecting, was about relationships.
I remember that too.
Yeah, isn't that? And so it's so hard to imagine for many of the students and the young people that I talk to. But one of the things that it forced us to do was that reading for me was my, kind of way out of what I knew for my day-to-day existence. It was a way that connected me to the outside world. It was a way that transported me to places that, just based in being in a small, country in South America, that one would have never even imagined that you would have access to. But through the pages of a book, my imagination grew far and wide. The places that I explored, were just, too numerous to even recount. And that was combined with having a father who was a journalist and a mother who was a science teacher. So the journalism type of experience with my dad, I have these vivid memories of all types of people coming to our home. And we were not raised in a way where parents went off and did something separately. We're in our room watching TV, which we didn't have television anyway, but we always gathered around the dinner table. We always gathered around whenever there were people who came to our home. We were a part of that in interaction and engagement. And even if we did not understand fully all of what they were talking about, because many of these were dignitaries who were coming on some types of, trips to, diplomatic types trips to Guyana and so on and so forth. But what it brought was just this, exposure to people and to dialogue that was stimulating and that, raised your curiosity about, well, what are they talking about? And just that exposure was an enriching, time for us. My mom, as a science teacher, had, once again, her sort of modus operandus was that get outside and let's, see what's going on. Let's, turn over some leaves. We had a fish pond in the back, which my dad had dug for us just as a way of entertainment. And so go, let's look at the fish and, let's think about the ecosystem. Let's think about their environment. And then she had lots of students that also came to the home for lessons. And so we interacted with those students and became a part of their, kind of daily or weekly exercises. So the exposure for us on multiple fronts was enriching, just stimulating, and just challenged our brains to just be constantly asking questions and imagining and, just all in all, just actively learning.
Mm-hmm. And how did that end up? I mean, that sounds like a quite a fabulous way to grow up, actually, and as you put it several times, rich and stimulating in abundance, which is, that sounds wonderful. I'm wondering, how did that end up getting channeled or filtered towards medicine for you? Was that also very early, or did that come much later?
My decision to do medicine came at around age 12. I was always, because we were always engaged in conversation, I've always been very vocal, and so people would say to me, oh, you're going to be a good lawyer. I was always the people's representative. My mom would say, anytime there was an issue in school, there goes Oneeka, the people's representative, and I'm having some type of negotiation and presenting and petitioning on behalf of whomever I was representing at the time. But at age 11, our family moved from Guyana to Barbados. And because we'd been raised in just all things science, I was a very good science student, loved science, loved to write. And there again, one of the things that I think, when I think about coming from sometimes what people might perceive as a place of lack or a limit, which was actually an opportunity for me, because we didn't have money to buy gifts and birthday gifts and Christmas gifts and all these different types of things. So I wrote poetry as presents to my parents or as a way of commemorating any special occasions, and so began writing very early. And when we got to Barbados, which is where we moved to when my family left Guyana, I was in what we call second form. We didn't have grades. I was around 12 at the time. And one of the girls in the class accidentally pulled her earring out of her ear, ripped out. And there was some blood involved. And as most of the people were kind of stepping back, kind of a little bit intimidated about the sight of the blood, I was the one who moved towards her and who tried to help her and so on and so forth. And I think it was in that moment that it occurred to me, wow, I want to take care of people.
Did that surprise you that you found yourself moving towards her? Do you remember?
I didn't even, afterwards, I thought, I wasn't either surprised or shocked. I was always kind of just a doer. And so it wasn't surprising that I would act. It was surprising that it was clear to me that this is what I want to do, because I had never really thought about being a doctor before. I didn't have any doctors in my family, and we didn't have any, thankfully, any significant illnesses, in childhood illnesses. My parents were very healthy. So it was not something that I was exposed to. So so that was, to have that epiphany at that moment was a little bit of a, ooh,
yeah, wow,
okay.
And that's fairly remarkable. I know a number of doctors and surgeons, in fact, and relatively few of them knew at 12 that had any idea, much less a kind of a revelation and an origin story in a sense. That's a wonderful thing.
Yes, and that was, and just to connect the dots a little bit more, what happened after that, and it was good that I decided at that time that medicine was what I wanted to do, because once I had made that decision, then came the follow-up, what do I need to do? What is the course of study? What do I need to make sure that I'm prepared with to make the next step once I finish high school? And one of the things that I discovered was that I needed to have physics as a subject to be as one of the prerequisites for pursuing medicine. And I was at an all-girls school that did not offer physics. And so, that was probably the first time that I encountered this situation where here it was that I had this goal, but there loomed in front of me an obstacle that kind of seemed to suggest that, well, this is not for you.
Right.
Because
and many people might have just said, oh, too bad.
That's right. It's not available. Oh, well, I'll just have to, find some other way around it. And my parents, and this is also one of the things that I talk about, is that the importance of advocacy. Because at that time, my parents said, this is not acceptable. Why are you being limited as a girl from taking, a subject that should be available to everyone? And so they proposed to the Ministry of Education that I be allowed to transfer to the all-boys school, which was, similarly named, but completely separate institutions. They proposed that I be transferred to the all-boys school. Now, I did have, a little bit of a cushion of my brother being at that all-boys school. And so I transferred, not just to take physics, but I transferred my entire schooling to the all-boys school.
Is that right?
Where I became the first girl in the class in the upper school. And what that did was opened the doors for other girls, so that subsequently there were 2 other girls that joined our class later, and we graduated together. And then the lower school then became integrated a little bit a year later, so that then girls began to be admitted to the all-boys school, and then the classes were co-ed moving forward. But the importance of that advocacy, and my mom, who continues to be very active in science education, in middle school education, continues to be just this incredible advocate for students of color especially, students in science, and bringing real quality that should not be limited just to a particular demographic or a particular gender. So that was, I think, certainly a defining and pivotal moment for me in being able to understand the importance of being able to have someone who can advocate for you, and then to be, despite the fact that you are the only one, or despite the fact that you are doing something new and different, but to approach it with a level of confidence and believing in yourself.
Yeah.
And that for me has become this cornerstone of the work that I do, which is how do I get kids to believe that anything is possible.
Yeah, and I do want to, zoom ahead in a second, but I cannot resist asking you just to elaborate a little bit more, maybe tell 1 or 2 illustrative stories about being the first girl and the only girl for a time. You said soon at some point joined by a couple of others, but for a time, you're the only girl in this situation. Again, I'm a little flabbergasted about what that would have been like.
Yeah, I think it's one of the interesting things about that experience is I think it speaks to how one sort of sees yourself. And at that time, even though I was going into this class of all boys, somehow I believed that we all had the same goals, and we did, which was that we were all intent on trying to perform well. So initially, and this is the funny thing, because my brother was in the class, but at the 13, 14-year-old, at the 13-year-old mark, he was not trying to be attached to me. I mean, he's
this is your twin brother.
This is my twin brother. So he said, look, you're gonna have to figure this out. You're kind of on your own here. But what I found was that initially, how you walk into a room, for me, makes all the difference. If you go in and what you're communicating is that you're scared, you're intimidated, you feel as if you don't belong, then it kind of sort of sets the tone for how people treat you. And so I walked in basically like, here, this is the new order of things. I'm here to do a job, and I'm here to do it well, and I'm not going to take any prisoners along the way. And so initially, I think the guys, they thought, oh, here's this Hubert's sister. That's my twin brother's name is Hubert. Oh, she's cute. Oh, this is going to be kind of our new plaything. And, there was that type of, the kind of, the eyes at you, the way they're looking at you, the testing you. And after the first math test, where I, kind of pretty much,
laid the gauntlet down,
demolished them all, there was a newfound respect. And I think that, they themselves, it was a new experience for them.
Yeah.
And so for them, it was that kind of, coming of age and this recognition that, oh, things are not always as they seem, or perspective about who girls are and what girls are capable of, will have to change. And I mean, there were all the, at that age, the boys were, walking hormones.
Absolutely.
I myself, we were all kind of in that place where we were coming into just our, kind of recognition, or beginning to kind of have these sort of feelings about, attractiveness and attraction and so on and so forth. What was a big, I think, a huge benefit for me was that the teachers were very open-minded. And the teachers, based on the fact that my brother had been in the school and had done very well, they had an expectation of me that I was going to be able to do well, and that they wanted me to do well. And it speaks to the importance and the huge impact that the expectations of teachers have on the performance of students. So that they had an expectation of me that, you know, you are literally, you know, blazing a trail here. All eyes are on you. And we're here to support you, and we're here to help you. And we want for you to be successful. And because they wanted for me to be successful, I mean, they provided a buffer. And so in the instances where they could either see things, you know, kind of either going off track a little bit, or, you know, boys kind of getting a little bit out of hand, I mean, they were able to provide some guardrails to say, okay, you know, this is appropriate, this is not appropriate. You know, we're going to set a code of conduct that's going to facilitate, you know, certain types of behavior. And one of the things that I think stands out for me as I talk about sort of our differences is that at that time, I had very severe menstrual cramps. And literally every month, I would be carted off, you know, to my home, doubled over in pain. And initially it was kind of embarrassing because, you know, those are things like I meant growing up even, like we did, you know, no one even said the word menstruation. I mean, like there was some other kind of code word for it. You never sort of talked about these things because it was, you know, the beginning of this sort of coming of age and this, you know, kind of transition between sort of being a girl and transitioning to, you know, being a woman. And so those were things that just were taboo. No one's talked about it. Under the rug. And so to be in a situation where I was in this class of all boys, and then, you know, I would be carted out every month, and people would be like, you know, Claire, it allowed me to, you know, to have this degree of sort of vulnerability and get comfortable with that sort of exposure. And I think for them, they became more empathetic, they became more understanding and more compassionate. And so they grew in those ways, and the things that, you know, would have necessarily caused that sort of shame and that sort of feeling of, you know, insignificance or insecurity became, you know, such that it was not something that, you know, sort of labeled me, and it was not something that was a significant disadvantage, despite the fact that, you know, I missed some classes here and there. You know, they were very kind upon my return. I was able to kind of catch up without any problem, and it didn't stigmatize me in a way like, oh, she's a girl, you know, girls have these problems and they just can't do the things that boys do, and here it is. Here, you know, of course, you're just kind of fulfilling the stereotype of, you know, the issues with girls.
Well, I'll tell you, it's very tempting, given how remarkable the narrative has been, just getting you to 13 or 14 years old, very tempting to kind of keep going, but we are indeed going to zoom ahead now, right through college and medical school and, you know, residency, et cetera, to the point where, you know, let's say 4, 5, 10 years ago, I don't know, as a practicing surgeon, I know your mom as well. You have a 12-year-old son, right? I believe, right? So you're a busy woman, a practicing surgeon, mother of a, you know, young and growing child, et cetera. And I know that your husband, who I think I'd also like to talk to at some point, is also a very busy guy. And yet, you decide that you want to add another element to what it is that you are doing. So tell us about that. How did the idea of that became Dr. Dede Dynamo, where did it come from? Where did it start? Just give us a sense of that.
Yes. Well, one of the things that has always been important to me, and certainly things that have been modeled by my parents, is this desire and the importance of giving back and of serving. And so being a doctor has been for me about serving. I see it almost as kind of a ministry. And throughout my college career, medical school career, and residency career, as was, you know, time would allow, I've always volunteered in multiple different ways and always served in multiple different ways, from my church to various organizations and, you know, various type of mentoring types of opportunities. I've always felt that it was important to reach back and to give back. And once I had finished or completed my residency, I started volunteering with a group called Science Club for Girls. And a chapter had actually been established at our church, the church that I was a member of at the time, which is Myrtle Baptist Church. And so I began to engage and volunteer with these young ladies. At the same time, so many of our friends had been, you know, having their own children. We have been godparents or are godparents to so many. And I began to really recognize that there seemed to be a real lack of powerful role models that encourages girls to believe that there are no limits to what they can achieve. As I volunteered with the girls in science at the Science Club for Girls, and I began to do a lot of different modules and activities with them, the numbers and the statistics about the lack of representation of women in STEM became glaringly clear to me. The stereotypical image of who is a scientist and who are STEM professionals, was very limited, and was, kind of a very one-sided, monolithic type of image. And as I began to observe, my little goddaughters and running around trying to be Superman and, Batman and Buzz Lightyear, and realize where are the superheroes for girls that allow them to model, being powerful and having someone that looked like them, that communicated that they could be powerful. So that began to percolate, in my head. And one day I was doing a cow heart dissection with the girls in the Science Club for Girls lab. And one of the things that I have always integrated into my practice as a physician is almost being a storyteller. So I feel like as a doctor, I'm an investigator, I'm a storyteller, I'm a teacher. And so I have to, when I'm speaking to my patients, I have to deconstruct, whatever the information is that I'm trying to communicate in a way that is simple and understandable. And many times I actually will create analogies to everyday experiences that help patients to understand what it is that is happening with them and what is going to be my recommendation. So as I was doing this cow heart dissection, I had decided that I was going to create this analogy between the New York subway system and the circulatory system. And so I identified the heart as Grand Central Station, all the other organs as the subway stops along the system, the blood vessels as the train tracks, the red blood cells as the train cars, and the people being the oxygen and carbon dioxide molecules that are hopping on and off of the train cars. And when I did that, you could just see the light of understanding go off in these kids' eyes.
Right, and also they'll understand and they'll remember.
They'll always remember that.
Yeah.
They will always remember that. And the light bulb went off for me at that time too. It became that, aha moment that said, here is a way that I can communicate science concepts in a storytelling narrative with analogies that kids can connect to very easily, that make science, which is all around us, easier to understand. And of course, my mom had written some science texts, so the notion of writing and writing text was not foreign to me. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, I'm going to create this storytelling narrative to integrate these concepts and infuse them with some type of really kind of exciting perspective that draws kids in. And that's where that started. And to the extent that I created the character, once I had decided I wanted to write in science, then I began to figure that I wanted to then integrate both, having diversity in children's books, having a strong, powerful, female role model. And I was having a conversation one day with one of my very good friends, Dr. Ebundo Pinga, who is a trauma surgeon in York, Pennsylvania. She was here for a meeting and we were trading horror stories. She was telling me about her stories, in the emergency room or the OR, up to her elbows in blood, really bringing a patient back to life. And I was telling her, my below the belt stories, which I won't elaborate on here. Yeah. And I said to her, we're like superheroes. We are literally saving lives. And we're doing, things that superheroes do. And it was then that the light bulb went off for me. And this was now, 15 years ago. I said, I'm going to write from the place that I know as a surgeon. And I'm going to create a girl super surgeon who is going to integrate these powers of positivity, this use of her gifted hands, to then integrate literacy, STEM concepts, build on a powerful female role model who is a diverse character, who then is going to model for all kids that there are no limits to what they can achieve. And that's where Dr. Dede Dynamo was born. That
is where she was born, and we're going to talk about how she has developed over the years since then and other parts of the mission that you see yourself on. with this. But for now, we're going to just take a short break, and we will be right back with Dr. Oneeka Williams.
Hello, I'm Carla Dorado.
And I'm Paul Werlin, inviting you to join us here at ACMI News.
On each show, we bring you an inside look at the news, events, and issues that affect all of us right here in Arlington.
And all of our content is hyperlocal.
That's what sets us apart.
Chief Ryan says after 20 years as head of Arlington's police force, he's learned that being police chief is more of a lifestyle than a job. It's a 24/7, 365-day-a-year responsibility.
After a patient's ID is checked, they're then led to the retail floor here where they can choose from a variety of marijuana flowers.
The astounding number of herring migrating through these waters continues to be robust as they make their way to points north.
Perhaps even in costume. You could say the connection is incredible.
And what's happening behind these walls is a public service in its purest essence.
This is your town, and this is your newscast. We invite you to become a citizen journalist in Arlington. Stop by our studio at 85 Park Avenue or call us at 781-777-1115 to find out how.
And to watch our latest newscast, check your cable schedule or check out our latest newscasts and segments on the web at acmi.tv/news.
We hope to see you soon.
You can always check out our latest segments and newscasts on the web at acmi.tv/news. And don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at ACMI News. If you have any news tips for us or you wish to become a citizen journalist, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at news@acmi.tv or stop by our Studio A at 85 Park Avenue.
Hello, and we are back with Dr. Oneeka Williams. I've got to ask you, I'm so struck by what you described about your own life and various points at which, again, you saw obstacles as opportunities. You approached, just to remind folks, you're a 12, 13-year-old girl going into a all-boys school. And your attitude was, I can do this. I've got this. I'm ready for this. Obviously, Dr. Dede Dynamo has a lot of that in her as well, and that can be very, very inspiring. But I'm curious, how is it that you hope to instill that kind of unusual confidence? Sense of empowerment, etc., in the boys and girls that you hope will be reading the books, but also I'm sure that you engage with in other contexts as well. But how can one instill that?
Yes, and you've really hit on the heart of what Dr. Dede Dynamo is all about. When we think about, and these are not my theories, we think about how children learn. And Piaget has a theory of developmental learning as knowledge building upon knowledge. So that what we know, what we learn, what our mindset is, which means, how do we think about our lives? How do we respond in our lives? Are really established very early on in life based on the messages that you're surrounded by, based on the images that you see, based on what you have been told. And so when we think about early imprinting happens just even before kids can even speak. It's what do they see? What do they see that communicates that they can do something? What images do they see that says, yeah, here is something that looks like this, and this is the definition of powerful and success. So my thesis is that if I can surround children with these images of positivity, of these images of accomplishment, of these images of what is possible, and then I can combine that with a set of tools that allow parents and begin to train not only parents but teachers. How do they interact with young people in order to foster that feeling of positivity, that equipping them with the belief system that helps them to understand that they are valuable, that they can achieve. And so it's totally in what we surround our children with, what messages we communicate to them. And this is why when we think about the voices of teachers, the voices of parents, this is why these things are so powerful. The images that children see on TV, now that our kids are so inundated with the technology and the devices, they are internalizing. I mean, the brain, you can think of the brain as just a set of electric circuits that is constantly being wired and rewired. And that wiring is completely based on input. And so whatever is being input are the things that are being integrated into their wiring, into their processing, and that's the output that's going to be, to be achieved. And so for that reason, the work that I am doing and I'm continuing to build on is based on this notion that we have to surround our children with these images, these messages that communicate these type of values and these type of internal characteristics. Now, you might ask, well, practically, how does that work? So I would like to create, based on and when I even think about sort of the Dr. Dede Dynamo, and I can't say that this is all, like I have been the master of my own fate and that I had all of this figured out before I even started. I mean, I'm very spiritual. I deeply believe that this has been a divine mission for me. So even when I think about Dr. Dede Dynamo and, someone like Martin Seligman, who is one of the founders of positive psychology, and his theory of well-being that has these sort of 5 pillars, these 5 characteristics. One is positive emotions, the second is engagement, the third is, relationships, the fifth is meaning, and the fourth is meaning, and the fifth is accomplishment. And these are the criteria that he says that we need in order to develop these positive attributes and these characteristics and factors that help us to believe and help to contribute to living a life that is productive and that feels good, where we have this sense of purpose and we have this sense of well-being. And what that means is that within a character like Dr. Dede Dynamo, who is modeling these powers of positivity, who has these engagement in many different ways in her family, within her team, whose relationships are the things that help to propel her forward, whose meaning in her life is about making a difference, and whose accomplishments can be then based on the problems that she has solved. She set a goal and she solved these problems. And so we can literally take kids through. When I think about one of the things that I plan to do, or am in the process of doing, is building curriculum around the books that then integrate these STEM concepts, the literacy and the importance of reading, getting kids back to why it's important to actually interact with a book and how that builds towards critical thinking and imagination and curiosity and asking questions rather than just being tied to a device. And using this as the platform to really intentionally bring kids into this way of thinking. Begin to equip parents with what I call these 5 habits of positivity, which is that if there's a problem, there is a solution. And this speaks to an empowered mindset. If there's a problem, there's a solution. We're going to work to find it. We might have to, do a lot of workarounds. We may have to do a lot of research. We might have to find some resources. But we are not going to. It may take a while. It may take a while, but we are not going to be discouraged with this belief, well, here is something that is insurmountable, that there's no way out of. If there's a limit, that we're going to convert it into an opportunity. So whatever obstacle that you face, do you have this growth mindset that this is something that is actually meant to help to prepare you? We say that growth happens at the edge of our comfort zone. And so if everything was always easy, I mean, I think about it and I tell my son this all the time. He's currently in 7th grade at Roxbury Latin, and it's an extremely rigorous experience for him, and it's been a huge adjustment. And there are times when he says, oh, Mom, this is so hard. And I say to him, when you look at bodybuilders, and they are, muscles, Mr. Olympia, Mr. Universe, the muscles are popping everywhere. They have been working against a resistance. And in working against that resistance is how the strength builds, is how the mass builds. If you're not working against a resistance, then you will not develop the strength. The other thing that I tell him is that, you know, at this point, we are here to help you with the heavy lifting. You can't lift it all by yourself. But our goal is to help you to develop the muscles and the strength so that at some point, you are going to be able to lift it on your own, and then you in turn will do the heavy lifting for your family, for your community. So it is a process. And so as we try to shape our kids' ways of thinking, which is that whatever you might have encountered, how do we look at what is the positive that you're going to extract out of it? And that goes to the third, you know, keep the positive and discard the negative. How are we going to use these positive emotions to fuel our drive, to encourage us? How do we know that we all have a purpose? I mean, meaning is extremely important. This notion that you're connected to something bigger than yourself. And in a lot of these theories, you know, it speaks to, positive psychology speaks to the importance of having something outside of yourself that is driving you to make a difference. One of the things that another one of these you know, sort of positive psychology theories that I read about, and he talks about this notion of flow. Flow as being, you know, to achieve your optimal psychological functioning is that you have to sort of immerse yourself in something that pushes you outside of your skill set, just a little outside of your skill set, so that it stretches you to be able to grow in a different direction, or in the same direction, but just to be able to grow. And then at the end of it, to have a heart of gratitude, to approach things from this perspective of what I have, not what I don't have. And then from that, having this, that then creates this belief system that, you know, I can shape my destiny. By having this outlook that empowers me not to sit back, not to just be deflated, not to be discouraged, but that presents and prepares you in a way that gets you, you know, into this unlimited mindset. And I think that those are things that we can totally train our kids to do. We can train ourselves like any other habit. It just takes the recognition and then the development of the patterns,
lots of
and then
practice,
just practicing it over and over and over again. And by using a platform like Dr. Dede Dynamo that pulls young kids into this early, because like anything else, if we can actually start this upstream, you know, early intervention in almost any industry, early intervention makes a huge difference to outcomes. And so my belief and my vision and my work is that by starting this early and that creating this framework where kids are surrounded by this type of information and messages, where I can create a real structure and tools that help kids, parents, teachers to use these habits, and then model through my own life what is possible, that I call myself now a positivity catalyst, which is that I'm just accelerating the conversion of what is already inside. None of the things that I talk about, none of the things that I have manifest in my own life is unique to me. I firmly believe that all children, all people have these tenets. And it is just a matter of how do I, as a catalyst, so a catalyst, and I love, I mean, for me, that I always somehow find the scientific connection. A catalyst is just an agent that accelerates a reaction using substrate that is already there. It's not taking anything new. It's just creating conditions that are much more achievable. And so for me, through the Dr. Dede Dynamo work, through my speaking, through building out to this larger vision and mission about this unlimited mindset and these tools that help you to get there, I am just being this catalyst that are creating these conditions that allow for these reactions where kids now are able to realize their full unlimited potential through the interaction with the work and the character.
I mean, very well said, and I'm not sure that there's anything that I can ask that's going to add to that, but I did want to note that you had spoken earlier when you were talking about imprinting and how that happens so early, and you just alluded to it again. And I'm realizing that you're choosing picture books. You're choosing to, and you brought some of them along, so feel free to show us as well. But the power, as you said, you're bringing the power of words and images to bear, and being able to, with these books, you know, have a child before he or she can read or perhaps even speak, starting to take in these impressions.
Absolutely, and it's so powerful and so important. And you know, when I think about, you know, this whole sort of notion of imprinting, you know, one of the things that it makes me really think of is, you know, is how do we develop implicit bias? How do we develop unconscious bias? How do we develop negative stereotypes? It's because of what we see, what we're told. And so I walk around the hospital as the 0.001% of urologic surgeons looking like me. Very, very few. And people will say to me, well, you don't look like a urologic surgeon, you don't look like a surgeon. And many, you know, initially, sort of in my early phases, I would get a little bit offended. Like, well, what do you mean? Well, why do I not look like a surgeon? But then I realized, well, I actually can't blame them. They are absolutely correct.
Right. You look around and you're like, wow, there aren't other surgeons that look like me, as it turns out.
So people only know what they know, and we can only expand what they know by presenting them with the images that show them differently. And so the opportunity to present these images to children and to surround children with these images, and not just girls of color, not just girls, not just, you know, kids, you know, not just all kids of color, but all children, because in having this character like this, and kids connecting to this character in ways that speaks to each kid in a different way. So this character allows for, and this platform allows for all kids to find those places of connection. That's not, that many times goes beyond just what is the external, just what is this defining gender or defining color, but actually speaks to the heart of who is Dr. Dede Dynamo? What does she represent? What does she love? You know, those are things that are so common in all of us, that the notion that a little white boy can connect to Dr. Dede Dynamo because she represents so much of who he already is, you know, breaks down these walls and barriers that tells us that the only thing that we can connect to is something that looks like us, or somebody that we think we have something in common with. But then when you really peel back the layers, you realize that there's so many sources of commonalities. And to the extent that this is an educational platform, one of the things that I believe is that when I think about also that subliminal messaging, that subliminal you know, exposure to information, and what begins to build this lifelong love of learning is being engaged with something that you find fascinating and something that you find thrilling and something that intrigues you. So I say for the Dr. Dede Dynamo series, this is like burying the medicine in the brownie, which is like, you know, that we have the little cat or the dog or your kids and the applesauce, and they don't want to take the medicine, it's kind of bitter, and then you bury it in something sweet and they gobble it all down, not even realizing that they're actually ingesting something that's good for them because the flavor has overtaken their senses. And I think that this book is the same thing, is that the flavor of the excitement, of the movement, of the adventure, of the characters with all their own specific personalities and quirks overtakes and draws kids in, that they don't realize that, you know, all of the sort of the biases around who can do science, who should be a scientist, what a surgeon looks like, all of those messages are being debunked in this book and in this series without them even knowing, so that their mindset and total what they believe is totally imprinted and developed based on something like this. And there was a study that came out of Columbia University 2 years ago that said that up until age 6, girls believe that they can be powerful and they can do you know, different professions that require brilliance. And then there's something that changes between 5 and 6, that then, you know, they begin to fall prey to all of the other messages. And so
having to do with school, do you think?
I think it's now having to do with more of the external exposures that begin to, the images that they begin to see on a more regular basis. They get into schools, what are the beliefs even the teachers communicate because of their own sort of internal bias. And so if you have this type of messaging that is so internalized, that is so imprinted from so early, it serves as a buffer to those messages, so that when when kids of color encounter those messages that say, I'm not valuable, they already have this belief system that says, oh, I reject that because I know that I am powerful.
They've got arrows in their quiver already.
Completely, prepared with this type of messaging. So I think it's very, very powerful. And I think even for, when I think about the Me Too movement, I mean, the importance of boys having that imprinting about the power of girls, the fact that they're on even, footing, the fact is that they can like the same things, they can value the same things, begins to develop within them a respect for, the female form, the women. I love that she's a little girl. She doesn't come sexualized with the boobs and the hips, so that, it already begins to kind of objectify, women. No, the goal and the message is about education. It's about empowering. It's about the things that we share in common that help us to connect in a way that is positive, that helps us to develop these habits of positivity, that make us believe and imprint that there are no limits, and to create this common ground so that we share and we respect that everyone within, our universe is valuable and has something that they bring to the table, and that our kids see that and value that and grow and build upon what I call making a difference in the way the generations think. Because as this generation grows, I think they will be growing with a mindset that allows us to now hopefully have less and less of just some of the toxic type of mentalities and philosophies with which we're confronted today.
Well, let's hope so. Let me just ask you a couple more questions. One is, though we have talked, and you've talked with great eloquence about the kind of all that is contained by Dede Dynamo, one thing we haven't talked about is the fact that, even looking at the cover of the book right there next to you, it's an iceworm intervention, as you say. It seems to me that you're also tackling subjects in these books.
Yes.
We've focused a lot on her own makeup and the inspiration that kids can take, and the kind of subversion of these biases that we are all prone to, et cetera. So all of that is more than enough. And yet you also are clearly tackling some issues. How is it that you decide what that is, and what's your thinking with that?
Yes. So for me, and Sarah had asked me this question, what does success look like for me? And success for me is making a difference in other people's lives. And I want for our children, and this is part of the habits of positivity, to understand that we have a responsibility to care for the people and the things around us, like our earth. So I do try to, within this, infuse this value system that we are here and we're responsible for, Earth, we're responsible for each other, and science brings us the capabilities to really make a difference. It's one of the set of tools that we have available to us to build out making a difference. And we've seen the way that technology has changed, that things that we may not have even previously imagined are possible. So with the iceworm intervention last year, I focused on climate change, because I think it is such an important, just, life-saving, potentially.
Right, this is a life and death, this is an existential threat.
It's a life and death issue. And it's important to begin to embed and to challenge our kids from early to know that they have a responsibility. And there's, Dr. Dede Dynamo's first habit of positivity is, if there's a problem, there's a solution. And I want kids to know that they are part of the solution. And so they have to begin to be exposed to what the issues are, to begin to even know how to think about it and how to think about creating solutions. So dealing with climate change has just been an amazing experience for me. I just got back from Alaska a couple weeks ago, where I actually went to attend the Iceworm that I wrote about in the book. And it just speaks for me, that has just been the blessing of doing this work, and what I hope modeling for kids what reading and writing is about, in that there really are no limits. And when I wrote this last year, I mean, it came from a place where I had decided that I wanted to address and tackle climate change. I wanted to make a statement that kids, no matter how young, need to be aware of it. And this is one of the reasons that the books now are in multiple versions. So this book is just a 0 to 4-year-old. I mean, so you want to, these books, the hardcovers are the 7 to 12-year-olds, and then I have the paperbacks that are a little bit simpler. So there are levels because I want to make sure that the messages are being delivered in a developmentally appropriate way at the appropriate levels. But having listened, thinking about climate change, and Dr. Dede is always saving something or someone that's in distress. And so I said, well, who is Dr. Dede Dynamo going to save? How am I going to connect who she's saving to climate change? And I was listening to NPR one day, and they were talking about this ice worm festival in Alaska. And I did some research on on these ice worms and discovered that because the glaciers are warming as a result of climate change, it's impacting on the ice worms' survival and on their population. They can only survive in a very narrow temperature range. So I decided, I'm going to have Dr. Dede and her family jet off to Alaska to attend the Ice Worm Festival, to connect with one of their friends. And it's during that festival that the alarm is sounded. Gordon, her gullible globe, who's the character that always hears whenever there's something or someone in distress in the universe, he hears the ice worms complaining that their habitat is warming and they're going to be affected and they're going to die. And so Dr. Dede then creates this solution for climate change. And I had to petition or make a request of the Ice Worm Festival Committee to allow me to use the image of the worm, which is their logo. This is the Ice Worm logo that's used on all of the Ice Worm Festival information. And they said, well, sure, but could you please send us a copy when you're done? And I sent them the copy of the books, and they loved it so much. They said, well, could you make some available so that, we can be able to sell them? And then it became, well, would you consider coming? And I'm from the Caribbean. I never imagined that going to Alaska in February would be in the least bit appealing, but it just shows, and that was my limited mindset. Look, I could not possibly imagine going someplace so cold in the winter. But the writing and this work opened my mindset to actually going and discovering this amazing, this amazing place, this amazing people, a whole lot of opportunities to learn about a different culture, about how they're being affected in multiple different ways. And it was really a transformative experience for me. And I want to bring kids into that world to realize that writing and reading are, vehicles that can allow you to have these type of experience that, you do transport yourself, you can immerse yourself in something that helps you to grow and helps you to just understand your position and your place in the world and how you can use, whatever your gifts and talents. I mean, I'm a surgeon, I'm an author, I'm a mom, I'm creating. My vision is that the Dr. Dede Dynamo series will morph into the cartoon series, the lunchboxes, the licenses, so that everywhere that there is a child in the world, there is the Dr. Dede Dynamo character that is communicating all these messages. And then I'm not just staying limited to the Dr. Dede Dynamo series because the work is about helping towards building this unlimited mindset in kids, building these habits of positivity. It is now expanding. So I've just published my first book in the Not Even the Sky is the Limit series, which is called My Joy Tank. And it's really looking at this internal place of joy that helps you and that contributes to you living an unlimited life. And so I use it to highlight of the 1,000 Nobel Prize winners since 1901, which is when the Nobel Prize was introduced. Of almost 1,000 of them, only 15 of them are Black. And so this book looks at their unlimited lives through this lens of joy and highlights, also teaches, because my books are about teaching, also teaches and modeling excellence in so many different forms. And I'm going to be highlighting, many different people. It's not just going to be limited to people of color, but I'm going to be picking subsets of people from a particular, whatever they have in common, to highlight then how there's this internal, quality that has contributed to their success as a way for kids to begin to continue to see these images of excellence in multiple different ways, shape, or form. And then because despite the fact that, I've said that even though Dr. Dede Dynamo is externally a girl and she's a Black and brown girl, the things that make her who she is below the surface are things that all kids can connect to. The excitement of her adventures, her love of science, are things that all kids that can connect to. But because there's still some people that live in a box of, oh, well, when are you going to write the boy book? I am going to be doing another series, a third series, with one of the characters from Dr. Dede Dynamo as Lucas, as the central character, bringing his own powers to bear and having the boy equivalent, so that for the people who just can't quite get past,
your accommodation
it's a girl, I can't, boys can't relate to girls, that I just want to be able to serve everyone.
Well, you know, I had one last question I was going to ask you, which was to have you take us a little out into the future, but you just did.
Yes.
So just like most of this interview, you kind of took it and made it very, very easy for me and for our audience, I'm sure, just to listen and be carried for the ride, which has been a lovely one, I have to say, and also an impressive one and an inspiring one. So that's a nice combination. I thought we were going to have a really nice conversation when we had you back, and I was right. So I want to thank you very much. I am sure, I hope for you out there in the audience that you have enjoyed this conversation as much as I have, and will take as much away from it as I will as well. So thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It has been my pleasure.
Best of luck.
Thank you so much.
With everything. Thanks.
Thank you.
For Talk of the Town and for Dr. Oneeka Williams, I'm James Milan. Thanks for joining us.